VBS is the #1 evangelistic tool used by our churches to reach lost people. Has anybody ever heard that before? Well, I know you wouldn't be here if you haven't heard that, if you haven't shared that, if you didn't wholeheartedly believe that. But this is more than just a statement. This is a fact. VBS is a great evangelistic tool to reach children. For over a century now, VBS has been used to spread the gospel to millions upon millions of people. Every summer, people all over the world say yes to VBS. Over the past 10 years, over 800,000 people in our Southern Baptist churches have said yes to VBS, but not only to VBS, they have also said yes to Jesus because of VBS, and that is worth celebrating. May I remind you that the most important thing that takes place in everyone's life is when they say yes to Jesus. It was around 3 o'clock on a Monday afternoon, April the 19th, 1993, on Pasadena Avenue in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. I was 19 years old. I had been raised in church. My dad was a preacher. But it was at that moment that I said yes to Jesus. On that day, He erased my past, forgave my sin, and changed my future. That is the most important day in my entire life. And I know every one of you here have stories just like mine when you said yes to Jesus. Saying yes to Him is so important that Jesus commissioned us to go out and tell folks about Him so they can say yes to Him. And VBS is a tool to do exactly what God has commissioned and told us to do. Kids love VBS. They love the games, they love the theme, they love the snacks, they love the songs. I mean, who hasn't had to endure those pesky VBS theme songs that their kids keep wanting to hear? Kids love VBS. Parents love VBS, believe it or not. I mean, for some people, it's a free babysitter for a week during the long schoolless summer. For others, it's an opportunity for their kids to get off of their devices and to see friends. I'm hopeful, though, that for most, it's another opportunity for their kids to hear about Jesus. Regardless, it's a fact that parents also love VBS. Some people, though, think that VBS is not relevant anymore. There's better ways of reaching the lost. It's too much work. We don't have enough volunteers, or our church don't have the necessary resources. Perhaps all of those things are true. But you have to ask yourself, what is the value of a soul? If you can reach one person for the Lord, what's it worth? Several years ago, I was called to pastor a very small church where on our first Sunday, we had 27 people, and 7 of them was my family. And in addition to our 5 children, there were 2 other children there in the church, and that church had not had a VBS in many years, we were told, but my wife began planning a VBS for that summer. Now, she recruited everybody that was willing to help, and just about everybody there did. It's not like we were dealing with a bunch of people. But while they were helping, though, they were thinking, why doesn't she just do this at home? It's just her kids. Christy, my wife, was planning for 24 kids. And that's because she could buy things in packs of 12. So 2 packs, 24. She really had no idea how many would come. Most of the ladies felt so sorry for her in the church that they started inviting their grandkids and their friends, and I mean, they wanted somebody besides those Fiscus kids to be there. On the first day of VBS, we had 42 kids show up. 42. She had to scramble to find enough supplies, and that week we averaged 44 kids a day. From that VBS, we started a children and youth program there in the church. The church bought 2 church vans and ran them for every service, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. Many of those kids got saved, and we were able to reach their families. God used that VBS to revive that little country church. I love VBS. I believe in VBS. I'm a little behind on my thing up there. I believe in VBS. I am passionate about VBS, and I am a pastor. Every February, I would do a vision cast for VBS for our church. We would reveal the theme, we would play games, we would answer questions, and then I would cast the vision for what a successful VBS would be for that year. And so with that in mind, what would you consider a successful VBS? Any answers? What would you consider to be a successful VBS? Soul saved. What did you say? Salvations. That's right. Seeds being planted. Church full of children. A few years ago, in that VBS vision cast, I shared that a successful VBS for that year was to impact 100. That church usually averaged around 80 children a night, so I believe they thought that I was challenging them to actually grow to 100 kids a night. But while that would be great, I went on to explain to them, I wasn't speaking about the number of children, but I meant that we desired to impact 100% of the children that came through that VBS. Every child to be impacted in some way. Whether we had 80 kids or 40 kids or 150 kids or whatever it is, impact every child that came through that VBS. I didn't want this to be just another VBS. I didn't want it just to be another week of babysitting or whatever, but rather I wanted it to be a life-changing VBS for every child that came. I believe that we should all desire to impact 100. On the associational or the church level, we should do all that we can to impact every child that we come in contact with, because it's through that impact that many of them will say yes to Jesus. In order to impact 100, we must involve 100. Evidently, I didn't do that slide. We must involve 100, or rather, we must have 100% involvement. I read a study a few years ago that during the 4th year of a pastorate, churches began to take on the image of the pastor. That means they, as a church, become passionate about what the pastor is passionate about. One year I went to the leader of our Special Days Committee, and I asked her to help me to put together a Valentine's banquet. She was very hesitant because they had tried that in the past but didn't have many people show up, and I told her just to help me try this again. And so as the pastor of that church, I began announcing it in every service. I began sharing about it on social media. I began talking it up to anybody that would listen. I told them about the photo booth we were going to have, the door prizes we were going to give away, the gift that we would provide for every guy to give his gal. When you tell a guy that you have a free date and a free gift to give his wife that he doesn't have to go and buy, that for us guys, that's very special. That is as almost as a lure as a good lure is for a fish. And finally, I told them about our speaker, my friend Lucky Teague. Brother Eddie, do you know Brother Lucky? Or knew him? He died this past year. That year, the place was packed. Every seat was taken. Everyone took photos. The ladies enjoyed the roses the men gave them. And of course, my friend, Brother Lucky, did an excellent job. Now, for those of you who might not know Brother Lucky was the pastor. What's the comedian that has all the Ledbetters? What's his name? He was Jerry Clower's pastor. In fact, Jerry Clower did a bit about Brother Lucky. Brother Lucky's a hilarious guy, did a great job, did an excellent job. The next week, the leader of that committee and I met, as we always do, to discuss the event, to see what went right and what could have gone better. She told me that she believed it went as good as it could, and the reason it did was because I, the pastor, supported it. One thing I have learned in 29 years of ministry is that if you want your church to have a successful whatever, then the pastor needs to support it. We need church pastors and associational leaders to support VBS, not just in words, but in actions. Little Johnny or little Susie might not say yes to Jesus without VBS, so we need pastors to support VBS. Many of you might have had conversations about why pastors and leaders in your churches or in this association might not support VBS more. I want to share with you a few reasons from the viewpoint of a pastor as to why pastors might not be involved like we would want them to. First of all, pastors are transient in nature. Pastors are transient in nature, while VBS directors have been in place before the foundations of the world was ever formed. When pastors come to a church, contrary to popular opinion, it is not our desire to upset everyone. Now we are faced with, now you might want to write this number down, this is a very important number, we are faced with 4,768,352 different ministries that the church is already involved in. And everybody wants us involved in their ministry. What are some ministries your church has other than VBS? Any of y'all have WMU? Any of y'all have, what's some other things you might have that in your churches?
We've got some men tonight doing knock time.
Doing what?
Men's knock time ministry right now.
All right.
Everybody with the pastor at that church is doing time off.
We have things, though, that we are all passionate about. And we will set out to start or get involved in those things in our churches. Some pastors are very passionate about discipleship, so they will do everything to make sure discipleship is a success in their church. They will direct most of their attention there. Others are passionate about evangelism, and so they direct their attention there. But for the most part, pastors don't seem to be needed for VBS to take place, so they find other things to use their time for. When the committee is telling the pastor about all of the workings of the church, they will mention who handles all of the different things like the men's ministry, the WMU, the bereavement committee, the VBS, etc. And generally they will say something like, Carol's great-grandmother was a founding member of this church, and her family has run VBS ever since. As a pastor, we are often told to delegate. Pastor, don't micromanage. Let us do what God has told us to do, and you do what God has told you to do, as long as you do it on time every Sunday. You know, because the nursery workers need to get rid of those kids. We're told to delegate, but then people claim that we are not involved enough. Why didn't you come to the Sunday school meeting? Don't you care about Sunday school? Why didn't you come to the security meeting? Do you not care about the security of this church? And in that point, I want to say I am very much concerned about the security of our church. I tell our security every week, whatever you do, guard the fat man. I'm the biggest target. Guard me. Sometimes it seems, though, that pastors can't win. We're either micromanagers or we simply don't care. But I believe most pastors look at what's working in the church and focus on things that are not. VBS seems to be working, so why upset the VBS director, Carol, and her dearly departed great-grandmother if you don't have to? A question I ask you maybe is, how many family members do you have in your church? Just think about that. Don't answer it. Just think about that. How many family members do you have in your church? How many does your pastor have? Did you know that one of the first things a lot of pastors hear is, don't talk about nobody in this church. They're all kin to each other. I can tell you at my church, I can tell you more easily who is not kin to everybody than who is, because that's a way smaller group. Pastors understand that if they stick their nose in where it's not wanted, they could lose their entire church. I have a little thing I try to live by in ministry. Don't die on a hill that's not worth dying on. Unfortunately, though, a lot of pastors stay out of VBS because they don't want to die on that hill. They believe that the director will feel threatened and become upset. When Carol gets upset, her entire family gets upset. When her family gets upset, well, you know, the pastor ain't got no family there. Carol has numbers. Another reason some pastors isn't... Okay, yeah, there we go. I'm sorry. Another reason some pastors aren't involved is because they don't understand why they are needed. They see a ministry that has a good director and is working, so they don't want to go in there and mess it up. But they might not be aware of the challenges that the director is facing. They might not be aware that when everything comes together in that week and it seems to be a roaring success, they might not understand that Carol had to threaten the lives of most of those people just to get them to volunteer. They might not understand how hard it is to get people to canvass a community and then to follow up afterwards. Unless a pastor is passionate about VBS like I am, they might not understand what it takes to have a VBS. Last night, I met with the prospective VBS director for our church. Our children's director retired this past year. I'm taking applications before I leave here tonight, if anybody would like to do that. So I was meeting with a prospective director at our church last night and was going over everything that was going to be her responsibility with VBS. And I'll be honest, it was daunting for me to tell her. It involves a lot, but sometimes pastors just don't understand. And then next, pastors are shepherds and shouldn't be treated like sheep. Now, what I mean by that is Carol wants the pastor involved. But sometimes she only wants him involved in a way that suits Carol. She doesn't ask him what he would like to do, what ideas he might have, or even his vision of VBS. A lot of times, Carol just goes to the pastor and tells him what to do. Now, I'll be honest, your pastor should be willing to take the trash out every night of VBS. But if that's the role that you're using someone that God has called and gifted to preach, then you are way underusing his ability. I personally, in our church, teach missions every year, and I love it. I love teaching second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth graders about what people are doing all over the world and right in our community. I love teaching about missions. The best way to get a pastor to not be involved in VBS is to underuse his ability. There are a ton of reasons why pastors are not involved in VBS, and so you can come up with a list of why they're not involved, but I want to talk about how to get pastors involved. First of all, I think the biggest thing you can do to get pastors involved in VBS is simple. Ask him. Ask him. Did you know, now this might blow your mind, but did you know that most people will not do what they are not asked to do? I'm speaking here tonight because Lori asked me to. I serve on the state VBS team because a few years ago, Jamie Baldwin, a state missionary, asked me to serve. I serve on the Lifeway VBS faculty because Melita Thomas emailed me and asked me to. You might think that pastors should already be involved, but don't forget to ask him. That might sound elementary. In asking him, the next thing is to educate him. Again, pastors might not realize how important they are to a successful VBS. Make a list of reasons why you need your pastor to be involved and tell him, educate him, tell him why he is needed. And then third, seek his counsel. Carol wants to tell her pastor what to do, but instead she should seek his counsel. He might have a fresh idea of what might work better. Remember, a successful VBS is impacting 100%. And to do so means involving 100%. And 100% includes your pastor. The goal for everything you're doing this summer in VBS is for children to say yes to Jesus.